Okay, welcome everyone. In this video, I'm going to show you how you can use Amazon's simple email service to build a custom email backend for your Bubble applications. So SES is very flexible and cost-effective, and it's pretty easy to get started with. And it also integrates really well with the rest of the AWS ecosystem. So it's a good option to explore if you're sending a high volume of email, or if you're trying to bring your costs down for your mailing system, or if you need a lot of control over the mails that you're composing to send to your users or customers. So what we're going to do in this video is we're going to build a very simple Bubble front end to trigger the sending of emails through SES, which is going to be processed through the Amazon Web Services serverless offerings, so particularly Lambda and API Gateway. So we're going to build an application that looks something like this. We're going to trigger workflows through Bubble. So these can be things like user signups or invoicing users, or somebody uploads a file to the database, stuff like that. And from there, we're going to call an API that's connected to a Lambda function in AWS. And from there, we're going to call the SES service and send mails to the end users. So this architecture pattern is the same thing we've seen in a few of our previous tutorial videos. So I'm going to go a little bit quickly through the API gateway and Lambda setup. But in particular, you can check out our machine vision tutorial if you're interested in some more details about some of the basics of these. But it's a fairly straightforward architecture and very quick to set up, just using some sample code from AWS for the Lambda and a standard REST API endpoint for the API gateway setup. And it should only take about 15 minutes to set it up. So here's an overview of the talk. First, I'll give just a brief intro to SES, and we'll look at the pricing and the developer guide and where to find the documentation. And then from there, we'll go through the steps of actually setting up an SES sender identity. So the prerequisites for this video, if you want to follow along, is you need an email address that you have access to, of course. You need an AWS account, and if you're going to be building your front end in Bubble, then you'll need a Bubble account. The first half of this video, where we talk about setting up SES, you can do this using any other front end if you have a React app or if you're building in Webflow or something. As long as you can call an API, this backend will serve you. So we'll set up a sender identity, which is basically just adding an email address that you send emails from to SES. Then we'll create a Lambda function, which will generate the body of the email and the headers and route the email appropriately and so forth. And then we'll create an API endpoint that exposes this Lambda function. So that's how we'll call the code in this Lambda function. And then finally, we'll connect that API to Bubble. And at that point, we'll be able to trigger a workflow in Bubble and send an email message that we either customize in Bubble, or we tell Bubble to send a particular email that we've stored in our Lambda function. And after we've got this all wired up, I'll talk about some different options for how you can trigger different types of emails according to the event. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is open the AWS Management Console. So once you log into AWS, you can open the SES console by either typing SES in here and clicking this, or you can open the Services menu, and under Business Applications here, it's right here. So when you click either of those, you will be taken to one of two landing pages. So this is the new design landing page here, and this is the older design. You can switch between them. So if you're in the new design, you can use the classic console and then cancel, and that will bring you here. So this dialog here comes up. You can click cancel, and it'll bring you to the old design. Or in here, if you're in the old console, you can click try out the new console, and it will bring you back to the new console. All the same functionality, I think, is exposed in both, so just whatever you like the look of. So we'll work here from the new console. So when you're here in the console, you can open the various submenus of the service here, which we'll do a little bit later, or you can create an identity, which is how you get started. We'll come back to this in just a minute. Or you can scroll down and open some of the documentation down here. So if you click on the developer guide, which is a good place to get started, it'll bring up this documentation with all the stuff down here. We're going to be looking at the code examples in a little bit, and specifically sending email using the SDKs and the Python SDK. And so we're going to be copying this code here to our Lambda function and modifying it for our first example. The second example, where we're going to be attaching files from S3, we'll be using different code than this here, but this is enough to get started quickly. So before we go through the process of setting up a center identity and a Lambda function with this code and so forth, just quickly look here at the pricing. So if your account still has access to the free tier on AWS, you can send 62,000 messages per month for free. This doesn't account for things like attachments and various notification systems and things, but just in terms of transfer costs, you can send 62,000 messages per month for free, so that's nice. And then after that, it's 10 cents per 1,000 messages. Where did I say that? So that's right here. So after those 62,000, you pay 10 cents for every 1,000 emails. So it's very competitive on price compared to some other alternatives, which makes it attractive to people sending a lot of email or trying to keep their costs down. So we'll go back here now to the console, close this older version of the console, and we'll start to create an identity. Okay, so once you're ready to create an identity, you come to the landing page and click Create Identity, and you'll be brought to this page. And you have two options for how to prove that you own the domain that you're trying to connect to SES. You can either have access to the DNS, and you add a record to the DNS, or you can add an email address, the one that you're going to use to send emails, makes sense. And the service will send you an email, you click the link, and your email will be added to the system. So it's very straightforward. So I'm going to be using an email address that I have set up over here. So this is sesdemo@legible.ai. So I own this domain, legible.ai, and I'm going to set up this email to be able to send emails from this account. So I take this address and I plug it into here, and we'll see in a minute that it sends me an email basically right away. So the first thing you'll see is this. This is sort of the main screen, the configuration screen for SES. You can see that my identity is currently unverified. Once I click the link, it will be verified. And so the way that we do that is you open the email that they send, that the service sends you, which is right here. And you get this link, click the link, and it will take you to a landing page. Congratulations, tells you where to find some more information, tells you about the sandbox environment, and so forth. So if we now I'll talk about the sandbox environment in just a second. If we come back here now and refresh the page, we should see that this has changed to verified. And that means that we're ready to start sending emails. So we're now able to send emails to ourselves. And so that what verified means basically is that you've proven that you have access and ownership of that domain, but you can't yet send emails to other people. So you're not ready to deploy to production yet. And so that's what, if we come back to that page that was just shown, which is right here, the sandbox environment, if you click this link, you'll be brought to this, moving out of the Amazon SES sandbox. What the sandbox is sort of a test environment where the stakes are low. You're not going to get complaints or bounces or anything, of course, because you're sending emails either to yourself or to the SES mailbox simulator, which is here. You can only send 200 messages per day and 1 per second. So be careful if you're when you're testing this to not send a whole bunch of messages and lock yourself out for the day. But basically what you do is you set up your logic, your Lambda function, or however you're configuring this. You test your email system, and then once you're ready to move out of the sandbox, you follow these steps here to request production access. So you can check out this page, request production access, but I'll show you how you would do it. So if you're here in this verified identity screen and you want to request production access, you come to your account dashboard and click request production access here. The path to get here is a little bit different if you're on the old console, but just check the documentation for that. But you click this, and the first thing you need to specify is whether the bulk of your mail is marketing or transactional. So marketing, of course, is things like ads or promotions, discounts, whatever. And transactional emails are things like sign up notifications or password resets or invoices or maybe reports that you're mailing to your clients or whatever. Then you want to specify the URL of the basically the website of your product or service where your customers will find you and interact with you. Then you'll specify what your use case is and a couple of other options. You agree to the service terms, click submit request, and I think it takes between 1 and 7 days. It's usually fairly quick, like a day or two, but yeah, you might have to provide some more information. And yeah, once AWS approves your request for production access, then you can send emails to whomever you want. we're not going to do that right now, because like I said, it takes time, but you really don't want to do that until you have your email chain developed anyway. So that's what we're going to do now. So the first thing we're going to do is open up the Lambda console by typing Lambda and clicking here, or under services here, you can find Lambda right here. You do that and you'll get your Lambda console, which looks like this. This is the second example that we're going to go through in a few minutes, but for now we're going to create a simpler one. So we'll type, click create function, we'll give it a name, so we'll call it SES simple. The runtime that we want is Python 3.8, and then you can click create function, and this will just create a hello world Lambda function that just returns a status code. And so while this loads, while this is created, we want to hop over to the developer guide, and note that the developer guide for the newer version of the console looks a little bit different than the classic guide, which looks like this. But I think the code in both is the same, so I don't think it matters which one you end up at. But yeah, you choose the runtime environment that you want to use, or the programming language that you want to use. We're just going to copy this and change a few things. So we come over here to our Lambda console, open the Lambda function, and maximize this. If this is going a bit fast, then like I said, check out the machine vision tutorial where we introduced the Lambda functions. But yeah, so we delete this to-do stub here, plug this code in that we just copied, and then we want to just make this a bit smaller. That's way too small. Just to format this. So this, all of this is the stuff from the developer guide. I think that is indexed correctly. So we'll take these two imports, move them up here, and then we'll look at what the code is actually doing. So we could also look at it over here. I guess this might be a bit easier. So the first thing we're doing is importing Boto 3, which is the Python 3 SDK for interacting with AWS services. And we're importing this client error from the exceptions module of Boto Core. So it's just a subset of sort of fundamental functions and methods here in the Boto package. And then what we're going to do is specify a bunch of data and metadata about the message, the body, and so forth. And then we're going to send it off. So the first thing we want to do is specify the sender. So this is going to be the from address. So whatever address we're sending it from. So in our case, it's going to be sesdemo@launchableAI. So that's what we'll replace it with. And the recipient, we're going to code it statically to be ourself in the beginning, and then dynamically later once we've got things wired up. A configuration set allows you to do things like track your mail sending. So I think I've got that open right here. So this SES configuration sets allow you to specify two different types of rules. So event publishing is if you want to send data to other AWS services like Kinesis, for example. You set that up here. Or if you have dedicated IP addresses and you want to use that to send your emails. So I'm not going to get into this. We're going to ignore this for now. So we're back here. So as it says here, you can just comment the following variable if you're not using it. I guess we're looking over here. And then you set your region, your subject line. Again, we'll code this dynamically later, but for now we'll just have a static subject line. And so after you set the subject line, we set the body text and the body HTML. And so body text is what is displayed to recipients with non-HTML email clients. So terminal-based email clients like Mutt or NeoMutt, for example, the user will see this. But then I think for most email clients these days, HTML will be rendered. And so it'll look sort of more like a web page. And this is how you get the rich formatting that you see in a lot of emails. And so whatever's in here will be interpreted by the email client and sort of displayed much like a web page. So then after you set those, you set the character set, UTF-8 by default. We set up a client. So this is using the Boto 3 SDK. We want an SES client with the region that we defined up here. And then we have a try except loop that will try to call this SES client and the send email function of that SES client. And so now we're just sort of populating an object with the various variables that we set up here. So you can see recipient is added to the two addresses list. So you could have a list of 5 or 10 or 10,000 recipients. I don't know what the limits are on this. Check the developer guide if you're looking to trigger lots and lots of email sends from a single Lambda call. And then here we set the HTML body to body HTML, this character set, same thing with text, body text character set, and then we set our subject, our source, and then our configuration set. We're going to comment this out as well. And if it runs, then the email will be sent using the SES service, and if not, then we'll get this error message here. And then we have this else condition as well. And so that's it. Basically, you just compose this object with all these variables and then send it off using this send email call. Okay, so now that we've seen what's in this sample code, we're going to go into our Lambda function and then change some of the stock details here and test it out just in this Lambda console. So we're going to set the sender and the recipient to the same value, which is just the verified sender identity that we set in the SES console. So sender recipient SES demo at LaunchableAI. This configuration set we're going to comment out. The region that this Lambda function is deployed in is US East 1. So we're going to change this to US East 1. I'm going to change the subject line to, let's say, hello from Lambda. The body text and HTML we'll just leave alone for now. We'll leave the character set as this. The client is fine. All of this can stay the same. And then we have to comment out this line because we commented out this configuration set here. So this variable is not defined. And so now the code is all set up. And the last thing that we have to do is we could deploy and then try to send an email as a test. But we're going to get an error if we do that the Lambda function is not authorized to call the SES service. So the way that we fix that is first we close this maximized view, and we come over to configuration for the Lambda function and permissions, and we can open up the role that we're using. So this role is created by default when you create a new Lambda function and given a couple of permissions, and just to write to logs really. And so that's this here, create log group and create log stream. So these allow your Lambda function to write to CloudWatch, which is here. You will see this error if you don't add the SES permissions to your role. You'll see SES simple is not authorized to perform SES send email. So the way that we fix that is over here in the IM console after we click, after we click this and we get this screen here. We want to click attach policies. So there are two ways that you can attach permission to access the SES service to your Lambda function. One is by using the AWS managed SES full access policy. So you type in SES and click here. And this policy will give you permission to access any of the functions in the service. Alternatively, you can click create policy here, and you can scope the Lambda function to just the verified identities that you want it to be able to send emails with. So once this loads, you would click service, you would type SES in this to filter down, click SES, and then specify in here the actions that you want to be able to call. And so we know that we want send email. That was the error that we saw over here, SES send email. So we'll add that, but you'll probably need several other ones as well. But just for the sake of demonstration, you add that one. You open the resources tab here, and we can add an ARN, or an Amazon resource name. Click this, and you get this dialog here. And your ARN, if you go into your verified identities tab and click the identity that you're using, you can find it here and copy it, and we can paste that in right here. And now this Lambda function can only call the SES functions with this resource. And so that's another option. So let's just do this since we've already defined it. Actually, there's likely to be various actions that we need that aren't defined in here. So I'm going to close this, and we're just going to use the SES full access policy for the sake of demonstration. So we click attach policy, and now if we refresh this page with our Lambda function permission configuration, we should see that full access, SES full access policy attached. So now that we've refreshed the page, you can see under this resource summary, these are the CloudWatch permissions we saw earlier, but you can see here that we have the allow SES star. So this allows everything on the service. Okay, so now we should be able to go back to our code and trigger the test event to send a test email. So if you don't have a test event configured and you click test, it will bring up this, this test dialog, test configuration dialog. You need something in here, even though we're not currently going to be parsing these key value pairs. You need to have them defined. So just click create and then test again, and it will call the event with that test data. So now it says it was successful. Email sent, message ID is here. And if we come over to our inbox and refresh, we should see that hello from Lambda email that we defined in the Lambda code. So let's see. Yeah, and then here it is. So we've now just triggered our first test email, and you can see here's the body, HTML body that we defined. And so now this is working. So now the next step is to attach this Lambda function to an API gateway endpoint that we will be able to call from external applications rather than just from within the Lambda console. So the way that we'll do that is we'll open up API gateway and define a REST API. So once the API gateway landing page loads, you'll see these 4 options for different API types that you can create. We're going to create a REST API. Click build, and we'll see this these various dialogues for setting the parameters of the API. We want a REST API, and we're going to click new API, and we're going to name it SES API. And you can give it a description if you want. Leave it as a regional type of endpoint, and click create API. And here we have the API creation and configuration console, and this allows us to set up our routes. And so what we're going to do here is we're going to create a method on the root resource of type post, and this will allow us to make a post request to the root URL of the API, which we'll see once we deploy, and connect it to our Lambda function. So we're going to say Lambda function integration. We're going to use this Lambda proxy integration. You can read more about this here if you like. But basically, we want to pass the request data straight through to our Lambda function so that we can parse it. We're going to keep it in US East 1, and then the function that we want is SES simple, which was this function that we defined here. And we're going to leave this default timeout to 29,000 milliseconds, but you can change it if you like. Click save, and then you get this prompt that you're going to give API gateway permission to invoke the Lambda function. So click OK. That's good. And then it will bring us to the sort of configuration and test screen. And so we can test our API by going in here, and we can pass a body. Later, we're going to pass Querystring parameters. But yeah, you just come into here and click test, and it will call your Lambda function. And we see hello from Lambda. So that's good. So that means that our API is talking to our Lambda function. And so now they're connected. The next thing to do will be to allow the Lambda function to pull out the body of the request and use that as the body of the email. So right now we're just using a static string for the body of the email, but what we're going to do instead is use this request body field to dynamically send data to the Lambda function, and that will get passed on to the email. So the way that we do that is we come back to the code and replace these static strings with a reference to the body of the request. So the way we do that is if we delete the body text here, and we say event body. So now we haven't talked about this event parameter. So when your Lambda function is called, when an API calls it, the event object is all of the data from the request that's being passed into the Lambda function. And in the case of a post request, by default, we have this event, this body field. And so this will just be whatever the body of the post request is. So in both the body text and body HTML fields, we're just going to replace that with event body for now. And you know, if you were sending over actual emails, then you may have separate bodies for the two, but for now we're just going to keep them the same. And we'll click deploy. Now if we click test again, we're going to get an error because the test event that we had defined previously doesn't have an event and body field. Specifically, it doesn't have a body field here defined in this. This will become the event object. So what we can do is delete these and define a body variable, which will be, let's just say this is a string. Let's say this is a body. We'll call it test again, click create, and now we should be able to trigger the Lambda function and pull out that this is a body text. So if we come back to our email client, we can see this is a body. I clicked refresh a bit too quickly there. But yeah, that text got passed over to our email. So that's good. Now we can come back to, if we wanted, we could test here. We could say hello from API Gateway. And now this should be the content of the email that gets sent. Let's see if it shows up here. And hello from API Gateway. That's good. Okay, so now we're dynamically parsing the body of the post request. And now the next step will be to deploy our API and move it over to Bubble, or rather to connect it in Bubble. So the way that we will do that is we come back to API Gateway, come back to our the API that we were on, and click Deploy API. By default, you won't have a deployment stage defined, so we'll click New Stage. We'll call it Test. You can call it Dev or Prod or whatever. We'll just call it Test. Click Deploy, and now we'll be given a URL to invoke this API. So that's this here. And so if we make a post request to this URL, then that post request will be proxied onto this Lambda function. So now let's hop over to Bubble and set up the API connector to talk to this API Gateway endpoint. So if we come over to Bubble, I have this blank application just called SES Demo. Here, there's nothing on the page, and that's fine. So we're going to come into plugins. I pre-installed API connector, and I pre-built the API, I'll show you what it looks like, but then we'll rebuild it from scratch quickly. So you want to name your call. You set it up to be a post. You're going to paste your URL in here. The body type coming back up here is going to be text currently, but you can change that to be JSON. The body type that we're sending, which leave as JSON. We can set these query string parameters, which I'll talk about in a minute. And then here's the body of what's actually going to be parsed in the message body that we just saw. So I'll collapse this, and then we'll just do this from scratch. So we want to say add another API. Actually, if I delete this, just to make it look more what you'll see by default, you click, this is what you get when you first install API connector. Click add another API. We're going to call it SES API. And then we want to expand our call, and we'll say send email with SES. You can call it whatever you like. Change it to a post. The data type coming back, as I said, will be text. We're going to use it as an action. So by setting it to this, we can trigger it with a button, which will connect to a workflow. And here we're going to paste the invoke URL that we saw right here. So we copy this and paste it in here. We don't want that part. And then we should be able to type some text in here. So we'll say hello from Bubble. And if we initialize our call, we should get hello from Lambda as a response. And then if we come back to our email, we should be able to see that hello from Bubble email. Okay, so now we are connected to our API. And so the next step, we're basically done, but the next step is to use a bit more dynamic data to set the subject line and to talk a little bit about the email templates that we can set either by storing them in our Bubble database or elsewhere. And then after that, we'll just finish up by looking at attachments. So to dynamically set the subject line of your email, we want to add a query string parameter to our API call. So the way that we can do that, we come back to our post call, and then, oh, sorry, I'm currently on the stages submenu. You want to go back to your resources submenu, click post here, and then we can go into this method request configuration, and we want to set some query string parameters. So the ones that we want are 2. It could be recipient if you like, but let's just say 2 for the email address of who is going to receive the email. You can make that required if you like. If you make any of these parameters required, you get this warning until you set up a request validator. So we can say that we want to validate our query string parameters and our headers, or our body query string parameters and headers. Let's just say validate everything and save it, and then we can force our query string parameters to be part of the request. So we'll say 2 subject, click here, and that should be fine for now. And so now this API is expecting these these query string parameters, and so we can pull those out in our Lambda function by referencing 2 more fields on this event object. So just before I do that, if we click test now, we should get an error because we don't have, actually no, we won't get the error here. Sorry, we'll get the error if we invoke this Lambda function through this API gateway interface. And the reason for that is that the requirement on those query string parameters has to do with this API call, not the Lambda function logic. So misspoke a little bit there, but if we come into test, oh, pardon me, if we come into the test menu and try to send a test request here, but we don't specify the query string parameters, then we get this error here, missing required request parameters. So then in here, we want to say, we want to define the 2 in the subject query string parameters. So we could say 2 equals, and then we have to use the email address that we have set up in SES for right now, and that's fine. So we'll say SES demo at LaunchableAI, and secondarily we'll say subject equals, here is a subject, and now we'll try to send this, and we should get a success message. That's good. Come back here, and we can see, I think this was the previous one. Here we go. So we get hello for our body, and hello from Lambda. Okay, so we're not yet pulling out the details. So we're sending the subject line over in the API call, but we're not yet pulling it out in the Lambda function to use in the composition of the email. So the way that we fix that is we come back to the Lambda code, and here's where we're setting the subject line. And what we want to do, make this a bit bigger, is we want to reference the event and then the query string parameters field on that, and then specifically subject within that. So now, if we deploy this and come back to our API gateway, we should now have this as our subject line when we send the email. So we click test, hopefully we get a success message. So we get hello from Lambda. If we come back to our inbox and refresh, here we go, and here's a subject. And so then we just do the same thing to pull out the recipient in the code. So here we have it hard-coded, but we can change this to instead, in the same way, reference event, query string parameters, and then we're calling it 2. So if we deploy this, come back to API gateway, our 2, it's set here. If we were to change this, we could set it to here, for example, and it will probably error out because we don't have that email address as a verified identity. Let's see. So we don't see an explicit error message, but we also don't get the email coming through. And if you come over to your CloudWatch logs for the function, the last invocation, we should be able to see an error message that it's not, email address is not verified. And we can see here SES demo 2. So it did get passed, it just doesn't pass the, it's not permitted to send to this address while we're still in sandbox mode. So we can then test it again and it should work. And if we come back to our CloudWatch logs, once again, if we refresh, we should see, maybe we go here, we should see a successful message sent. Yeah, so here we go. Okay, so now we're pulling up to the recipient, the subject line, as well as the body of the email. And so the simpler version of this tutorial is largely done. And so now let's just set it up so that we're passing data from Bubble to to the body field of the request. So if we come back to our bubble interface, what we can do is say let's put an input here for the subject line. We can put another one for the recipient, but we're going to leave it blank just as a placeholder. We'll put it here, and then we can put a multi-line input here. So we're going to put, let's say this one, the placeholder is 2. Placeholder for this one is subject, and then placeholder, enter your message. So the idea here is sort of like an email form. You want to specify the recipient, the subject line, and the message. In the subject, so what we're going to do is set up a workflow so that a user can trigger an email to be sent by clicking a button, and take the data from the subject line and pass it to this to the subject Querystring parameter. We're just going to leave the 2 alone for now because of the error that I just showed you, and then the body here will come from this field here. So the way that we would do that is we would say when that button is clicked, so we say when that element is clicked, button A, let's say, change this to send email, and we'll call it button send email. Come back here, button send email is clicked. What we want to do is call the API connector function that we set up here, send email with SES. And here we can set the body to be the multi-line input, enter your messages value. But we see here we don't have any fields for the subject line or the 2. And the reason for that is because over here we didn't specify any parameters. So we can click add parameter here. We could add one here that's 2 and one that's subject. And we need to set up some defaults to initialize. So we'll say SES demo at LaunchableAI. We'll leave this private, which means that it's going to be hard coded. It's static. We can't change it in the application through dynamic workflows and things, but that's fine. But for the subject, we do want it to be dynamic, so we uncheck that, and we'll say hello from Bubble API connector. And then you need to set these 2 parameters to be specifically Querystring parameters, and then we should be able to initialize the call, get our success message, and then if we come back to our inbox, once again, we should see hello from Bubble and hello from Bubble API connector. Okay, and then if we come back to Bubble in our workflow, then here we now have this subject parameter. We can replace this with the input subject's value. And then if we now preview our page, we should be able to type data into these fields and trigger the workflow to send the emails. Don't mind this. Just have to reload the page. So let's say hello from within Bubble app, and then say this is a great message, and click send email. And hopefully, if we come back once again to our email inbox, we now have this hello from within Bubble app. This is a great message. Okay, so now we've got the simple case wired up, ready to go. And I'm going to pause the video here for a second and then come back and show how we can do the same thing, but we're going to attach an email, attach a file to the email as well. So to demonstrate adding attachments to emails, I've put up some code on GitHub that I will link to in the description that has, this repo has both the simple code that we just looked at, the simple template. So this Lambda function here is effectively the same stuff we just looked at, just with some placeholders added here. So this is all the same thing with the sender, recipient, AWS region, and so forth. This is exactly, aside from the actual content of a couple of fields here, like the sender, that's exactly the same thing that's over here. But then there's a second directory which has a Lambda function and sort of a helper file to compose the email. And so that's under here, template with attachments. And so in here we've got a Lambda function which is sort of a wrapper around this email composer file, which we'll look at in a second. And in here what we're doing is we're importing some of these MIME libraries. So MIME stands for multi-purpose internet mail extensions. And so this allows you to create sort of multi-part email messages where one of the parts can be an attachment. And so I'm not going to go through this code in very much detail, but if you can understand the code from the simpler example, this isn't too much different. And so what we're doing is importing this email composer file into that Lambda function, and we're defining an email class. Here's the initializer, and defining some methods on it, basically just to build the message. And so it's a bit more involved. We've got this generator wrapper function down here, which basically just calls all of the methods. So we're going to set the sender and receiver and subject first. And so that is, where's that function here? Here we go, set sender, receiver, subject. So what we're doing is we're setting on the email object, we're setting these three variables, subject, sender, recipient, which is going to just get passed to SES in the same way that we were doing it before. And we're just referencing the same fields that we already looked at. So the event query string parameters, subject, sender, and 2. So that's the first thing we do, is we just set that data. Then we generate the HTML body, we generate the text body, which is just as we did before. So here we generate the HTML body, generate the text body. And so in here is where you can start to sort of customize things differently if you wish to, for different messages, or sorry, different views of the message rather. And then here, this is where the attachments come in. So we have this download files method. And what this does is it parses, well, first we define an empty list called attachment file paths on the object. And then if there is a query string parameter called files, which will be a list of S3 locations, then we're going to go through those one by one. We're going to iterate through those, and for each file path in there, we're going to call the S3 download file method. So the assumption here, of course, is that we're storing files on S3. We're setting up this S3 client. I can make this a bit bigger. We're setting up an S3 client through Boto3, and then we are doing a couple things. So here, this what this outpath variable is doing is we're setting a path to download the file in the temp directory of the execution context of the Lambda function. You have 500 megabytes of non-persistent storage in the execution context of the Lambda, which you can access in this temp directory at the root. So basically we're saying download the file and store it in this, this temporary storage. The bucket name here is, I have this Launchable SES demo, which I'll show you in a minute, this S3 bucket. You could make this dynamic if you have multiple buckets, of course, but we're just going to hard code this. And then we're calling this S3 download file with the name of the bucket, which is this, the name of the file path, which is the S3 location, and then the out path, which is the local storage location, which in our case is this temp directory. And then what we're doing is we're calling the attachment file paths, or sorry, we're calling append on this out path, on this attachment file paths list object, which we defined up here. Yeah, and then from there we compose the mail, which is just combine all the different pieces. So that's this function here. So again, some of these things we've already seen, the character set, the AWS region. We're setting a mail client. We're setting up a mail client connection using Boto3 to SES as we did before. We're creating a MIME multi-part object with this library that we imported here. And where was that? Yeah, we're setting it to this alternative child container. You can check the documentation if you like for this. We're setting the text part of the message to be what we pulled into body text. We're setting the HTML part of the message to be what we pulled into body HTML. And then we're attaching these two messages to the, or sorry, we're attaching these two parts to the message object. And then finally, we're attaching the message body to the actual message. And then the final thing that we need to do is we call this attach files method, which is right here. And effectively what we're doing now is iterating over the downloaded files and attaching them to the message as parts. So we use this MIME application object, and we're opening the file path for each of the file paths in this list that we defined in the last step. And we're going to read the data of that file into memory, and then we are going to we're going to set a title and a header for that file, and then we're going to call attach on that, that object that's stored in memory. And once we've done that, we have sort of created the email, and then the final thing that we do is we call send email. So if we, before I go back to the Lambda function, we just have a try except block, and it's just trying to call send raw email. So this is different than the simple example where we just use the send email call. You need this send raw email when you're sending bytes or files that are attached to the email. And if not, we just get an error. So if we come back briefly to the Lambda function, this is what gets invoked in the when you call Lambda through your API, and it's saying set up an email object using the event that we passed in through the API, then call that generator wrapper, which composes the email, and then finally call send email. So it's just a little bit cleaner. You could put all of that logic from that other file in this Lambda function. You don't have to have it separated into two files, but I just found it a bit easier to make sense of this way. And so now we'll look at how that actually operates. So if we come back to our Lambda functions console, this SES simple is what we built earlier, and this SES with attachments I pre-built just using this this code here. So SES template with attachments. Pardon me. So if we bring up the code here, we'll see it's the same email composer and Lambda function. And what I'm going to do is change the API gateway definition to be connected to this Lambda function rather than the SES simple. Just need to reload API gateway here. And so the way that we can do that is we come back into our resource, our post method, and come into integration request. And down here we have the Lambda function that it's attached to, and we want to change this to SES with attachments. Click Save, click OK. And now if we try to invoke it, we will probably get an error because of the way that our test event is defined. Yeah, so we don't have our query strings or request body defined any longer because we changed it. So let's say this is a body, and we'll say 2 equals SES demo at LaunchableAI, and subject equals testing attachments, making lots of typos here. And this might work. We don't need to have any attachments in the logic, but yeah, we get an error here. So we're seeing that error for 2 reasons. Number one, I had made a mistake in defining the return value. API Gateway requires certain information coming back from a Lambda function for it to parse it correctly in the return value. So I've updated this, and then the other thing that wasn't in place is I had forgotten to put in a couple of the query string parameters. So we had defined to and subject, but we had not yet defined the sender, which the function is asking for in this generator wrapper here, this recipient, sender, subject. So these 3 parameters, and then also the files parameter here, which is how we get the file paths to the files on the S3 bucket. So if we come back here, we can see now that we've got this 2 parameter here. We've got the sender parameter, the subject parameter, and then finally the files parameter. And then we just have a body here. And we also have to set this up in our definition of our API. So if we come back to our post method, and then back into our method request, under query string parameters, we have to add these 2 additional parameters, so files and sender. You can make them required or not. Probably don't want to make files required, of course, but once you add them in here by clicking this and then specify them in the test call, then you should be able to call your API and create an attachment, or sorry, create an email that has attachments on it. So now that we have those defined, we can add these values back in here, and we can type a body in here, and then we should be able to test. And this should, we get a success message, which means over here we should, in a second here, we should have an email that has 2 attachments. So this is catphoto.jpg. Oh, so actually, if we come back here, we can just see we have just cat photo. If we say dogphoto.jpg and then send it again, we should get a second email that has both. One other note, I changed the file parsing code slightly so that here we have event Querystring parameters files, whoops, and then we cut call .split on that, just so that we can pass in the Querystring parameters a list of comma separated file names. We come back here and now we should have two attachments on our email. And if we open them, we can see, so this is the cat photo. This is what that looks like. And if we come over to this S3 bucket, that is this cat photo here. And we should be able to click open and see the same photo. So there it is, and here it is again. So attaching these files from this S3 bucket. So then the next step would be if you want to attach files from your Bubble database, then we need to parse the URLs of the S3 objects in your Bubble database and the default storage. So to do that, we need to change a couple things. We need to go into Bubble and change our API connector to accept that files parameter. And then we need to create an uploader in the form so that we can allow the user to upload a file and then in the workflow attach that to the API call. And then we need to make sure that our code in the Lambda function is parsing the path of that file correctly. So let's do that one at a time. So we'll start with the Bubble API connector, and we'll come over here, and we want to add these two parameters. So we want recipient, now that the API is expecting that, and we also want files. We'll make these dynamic. We'll take this email here and put it in recipient. And then for files, right now, let's just say catphoto.jpg to make sure that it's still working as intended. And when we reinitialize it, we are getting an error. Oh, that's because we haven't clicked this Querystring box. Try again. Made a mistake here. This shouldn't be recipient. This should be sender. And then if we initialize, hopefully we'll get a successful call. Yeah, we see the success message. And over here in our inbox, we should see, that's the dog photo. We should see the email that we just sent. So hello from Bubble API connector with our cat photo. So that's good. So now the next thing to do is to be able to use files from Bubble's file storage. So to see what we're going to need to change in the code, we can come back to our page and add a picture uploader and then look at the path of the file in the Bubble database. So we have this here, we'll click preview, and we're going to use this to upload that same photo, the cat photo, and then we'll come into our database and look at the file storage. So we click here and we come into our folder, type cat photo, and now we've got this photo in our database or in our file storage on Bubble. We come into data, into the file manager, click search. We now see this cat photo. And the tooltip that's popping up here, this F16249, et cetera, make it a bit bigger. That, I guess it doesn't actually get bigger. That's the actual name of the photo, and you can see down below at the bottom of the screen, if you look carefully, there's an s3.amazon.aws.com/appforest_uf and then the file name. So what we want to do is grab appforest_uf for that's going to be the bucket name, and then the name of the file is the rest of the string, starting with F162 and going to the file with the extension. So what we're going to do is come over to go over to our Lambda code and change the bucket name and file name to reflect that. So the first thing we can change is just the bucket name. So if we come over to our code, we can change the bucket here. The name was Launchable SES demo, but we can change it to instead be appforest_uf. And then we're going to just use a bit of a kludge to get the path. We're going to strip the URL leading up to the name of the file. So what that will look like is this. So if we come back into Bubble and upload a photo, we can see this is the URL of the photo in file storage. So the way you reference that is just by saying picture uploaders values URL. And so this is the URL of the photo on S3. And so we want to strip off everything up to this slash here, and we want to keep this F162, et cetera, and the cat photo. So we want to keep everything after the F until the JPEG. So the way that we can do that is we can come back into our code, and where we had initially defined file path, fpath, just to be read from the query string parameters. And now we're going to take what's passed in and we're going to strip off that first piece using a regular expression and the substitute method. So you want to import the RE, or regular expressions module, and then just replace fpath with fpath, where we substitute this prefix, this string here, just with an empty string. And then when we do that, we'll get the name of the file. And we have set the bucket here to be appforest.uf. And now in Bubble, we should be able to fill in the details here and send a photo. So what I'm going to do, we'll check our inbox here. The last one is this SES demo at LaunchableAI. So we're going to do our final test email. We're going to say, you can leave that alone. We'll say final test email. And we'll say this is a dog photo. How cute. And we'll come in here and we'll pick the dog photo. And we'll see this is the URL again. And when we send the email, with a bit of luck, this will be passed onto our inbox. And we will see the attachment on the email. And here we go. Final test email. Here's the attachment, and here's the dog photo. And there he is. Okay, so that covers everything I wanted to talk about in terms of setting it up. The last thing to talk about is how you can store different email templates. There you have a few different options for how you might want to set preset emails, how you might want to set them up and reference them. So we'll talk about that just before closing out. So I'll just talk briefly about three options that you could use. One is to set up templates in your Bubble database. Another one is to set up some template emails in the Lambda storage. So you can add some text files to your Lambda deployment package and then read them in the body of the Lambda function. And then another option is to just have the text of the email hard-coded in your Lambda function, which might be fine for testing, but it's probably not a good idea long-term. So let's do the Bubble database version first. If you come to your database, define this data type here called an email template, and I've given it a title or an event. So this is just the title of the template or the event that might trigger sending this email, and a body HTML. We'll just keep it simple. I've created a couple of examples. So we have a deactivate account email and a sign up email with some body HTML. And then in your workflow, you could say, set the body of the request equal to, for example, let's say we're triggering this on sign up. We say do a search for email templates where the title or event is equal to sign up. And then we take the first item and we take its body HTML, which is this. And then that should send it. What we're going to do, and so I'll send an example of this. Note before I send this that we've got this param.files, which is going to pass the URL of the picture uploaders file. If you try to send an email just the way it's currently configured, if you are following along, if you try to send an email without uploading a photo, it will use the photo that we initialized here, catphoto.jpg. So what you might want to do is come into File Manager and click on this file to grab its URL, or you grab it from the code if you like, and then plug it into API Connector as your initialization photo, just so that if you are trying to test your email sending pipeline and forget to upload a photo, it doesn't error out. You'll get an error if you leave it as cat photo, because then you're trying to download a file called cat photo from the Bubble S3 bucket at forest_uf. So that'll cause an error. But anyway, if we come back to our page and refresh, we should be able to just test that this is working, that it's going to pass that the sign up email. So we can add something in here, but it's not going to reference it. The subject will be, this is a DB defined template test. And hopefully we can send this and receive the email over here. And here we go. And so this says, no, it's this one here. This is a DB-defined template test. And then you can see we get this cat photo just by default in the initialize, from the initialized call. So that works pretty well if you want to create a bunch of templates in Bubble and then just reference them according to whatever is happening in your workflow. Another option is you can come into your Lambda function and you can manually say add a new file, and you can put whatever content you want in here. So you could say this is the text for a sign up email, or if it's an invoice, let's say it's please find invoice attached. And you can do lots of parsing in here, right? So you could have a tag that says body text, for example, and you put it in here, and then you could say body HTML, and then you could write some parsing logic in your Lambda function that says, let's do just a p tag. I'll say whatever, please find invoice attached. And so this is an option, and then you would just let's say you're going to save this file as invoice email and save it. Then you see this here. You would in your email composer, you might have some logic here that says with open and then the name of the file, so invoice email, and you would open that to read it as f, and say f.read, and so on and so forth. Just file handling logic to get the data out of the file and then pass it into this email composition script. So that's another good option. And then a third option would be to have the message text. If you're only going to be sending a few different types of emails, you could say if, condition one, so if, say, event Querystring parameters, maybe you set a parameter to say message type in your API call. You say if it's equal to sign up, then you're going to do whatever you need to read, say, a sign up email. Or sorry, what you're going to do is set the body equal to something in particular. So this is, thanks for signing up, let's say. And then another option, you could say if there's the deactivation or whatever, you would just have the logic in here. And you would just say something like elif event Querystring parameters message type equals something else. So say equals deactivate, then you do something different, right? So that's another option. And then one final option that I forgot to mention at the beginning is you could have different Lambda functions dedicated to different email chains. So maybe you have one Lambda function that is set to fire when somebody signs up, and you have an API connected to that. And then you have a separate API connector endpoint plus Lambda function pair for deactivation, and maybe another one for invoicing, and whatever your use case is, you could separate the content that way. So any of these will work just depending on your use case. And I'm sure there's lots of other options. You could have data stored in a DynamoDB table, for example, that you read whenever somebody makes a request to your API. All kinds of different options. So that's one of the really nice things about this backend is it's super flexible. You can gather data from anywhere. You can grab your attachments from anywhere. It's easy to grab them from S3, but you could be curling them from the web, or you could be pulling them from a different database or something. So yeah, lots of options. So I'm going to make this code available. I'm going to update the repo that's on GitHub. So right now, I currently just have these two different templates, but I'm going to upload this one that we've been working through to make Bubble uploaded files available. So there'll be a third, sorry about this, there'll be a third template here that will say template with Bubble attachments. And so you find this on GitHub. Hopefully this was helpful if you're interested in using AWS Simple Email Service. And if you have any questions or comments, please leave them below. And thanks for watching.